So hi, everyone. Jodi Daniels of Clover Advisors. Brief reminder that I'm not an attorney, so I'm not providing official fancy legal advice. But to dive in on Data Privacy Day, we're going to talk about complying with privacy laws and being what I call a privacy-forward company, even if you are confused or overwhelmed. It can be done. And I could sing because I love to, but I won't today. And I believe that Billy Joel said it best. It's a matter of trust. Earlier this morning, I was talking with the clients about their marketing and message and privacy obligations. And we talked about how it's a significant emphasis on trust. And it's all about engaging with our customers. And we want them to buy our product and service. We want them to sign up for that marketing email or engage in our digital marketing. But we want them to do so because they believe in our brand and our product, but also that they're going to trust us when we give or when they give us their data. So how can we do that? And why does it matter is what we're going to be talking about here today so that you can leave with a solid 2021 plan. Now, you might wonder, well, why does privacy even matter? Well, it matters for a variety of reasons. First, there's some laws. And generally speaking, companies want to be good business stewards and comply with various laws. Things like Gdpr, the General Data Protection Regulation in the EU, the Ccpa, the California Consumer Privacy Act, as well as its up-and-coming 2.0 version, which we'll talk about in a future webinar called CPRA. And literally, as we're talking, New York, Washington, maybe even Virginia, and a myriad of other states and countries around the world are looking at passing privacy laws. In addition to privacy laws, we have our customers. Our customers, maybe you're in the B2B space, and you can't sign that new contract until you can confirm your company is complying with various privacy and security laws. Maybe you're in the B2C space, and those consumers are not quite ready to give you their name and information. Or maybe you're asking for a lot of information, but I won't give you the accurate data points, like how much I make or my family's makeup of how many kids I have, unless I can trust you as a brand. And investors. More and more investors are looking at privacy and security as a point before they make that investment. What are your practices? And if you don't have a solid privacy program now, as soon as they make that investment, they'll ask you to do so, or it might even curb the valuation. And the same would be true if you're trying to do an M&A situation, if you're trying to divest of your company, potential investors or purchasers of the company will look at it as well. The common challenges I often hear to, well, how do I comply with these laws? And what do I do with my privacy program? Or I've started and I'm not really sure what to do next. So I hear people are overwhelmed. I talked to a company earlier this morning as well, and they're overwhelmed. They're not sure what to do. They just know that they need to have an end output of what's called an Article 30 report. They need a data inventory. Someone else just knows that they need a privacy notice, and they're not really sure where to start. And then which law do you comply with? And do they intersect? Do they overlap? Which one do I lead with? Maybe you're in the financial or healthcare space, and you might have heard that those laws are out of scope for California. Or you hear, well, I don't sell any data, so that means I don't have to comply with the California law. Quick hint, both of those are misnomers. The law is beyond just the sale of data. And so you have to kind of work through those different points of confusion. And then a very, very common challenge I hear all the time is limited resources. We have one person, maybe you have no people. And so with that, I actually want to pause and have our first polling question. I've also been asked, will the slide deck be available? I'm delighted to have the slide deck be available. And the entire presentation will be recorded and distributed as well. So my first polling question is, who is responsible for privacy at your company? No one really. CFO, legal, marketing. You have a dedicated privacy office that's separate from security. You have dedicated privacy, but they're in security, or the security person has been flagged as also the privacy person. And a few people have posted not listed. If you're willing to share, I'd love to know where it sits. So feel free. Compliance, thank you. Few more moments to get a few more folks in. The DPO team. Where does the DPO team sit? And I ask this question because I will be honest, I'm asked all the time, where should privacy sit? And how should the privacy office be structured? So I hope that this is actually really valuable for everybody here. And the CEO, thank you. So I'm hoping that this will be valuable information. And I'm going to end the poll about a minute in. And so you can kind of see here, about a third of our audience has a dedicated privacy office that's separate from security. We have a handful of people where security and privacy are the same, which is a really interesting piece because they're different. They're similar. They're connected. I call them concentric circles, but they're actually different. So again, hopefully this was valuable to everyone here. All right, I'm going to close my polling question, and hopefully we'll move on to the next polling question a little bit later. Well, you are in the right place. So today we are going to cover how to create trusting customer relationships and lead with privacy, digital marketing and privacy messaging, key focus areas for 2021, and then I have a special bonus resource and a few other items that we'll cover. So to dive on in, why should you pay attention? And who is this Jodi Daniels person and who is Red Clover? So just a little bit about us. We've worked in B2B technology, e-commerce, media, agencies, professional services, and more. This is just a smattering of the types of companies that we've worked with, from small startup to large international. And we love to educate. So we've been in a variety of different places. This is just a small smattering of them as well to get a flavor for where we are. But to jump on in, why else should you be paying attention? Well, Gdpr, it has some fines. You've probably seen the headlines, up to 4% of global revenue. But in the last year, they've jumped 39%. So just a handful. And actually this week, you might have even seen in the news that Grindr was fined $11.7 million over third-party data sharing. And it actually was via advertising. So we have a lot of advertising pixels that are on the site. We might partner with others, and kind of that ecosystem and how they were using it and how they communicated is a bit of what caused the particular fine here. Marriott was due to their data breach. It was a significant reduction. Same with British Airways. Google has been fined for a variety of different reasons. This one related to cookies and consent. And H&M was actually a really interesting one around employee surveillance. This is just a handful of ones to give you a sense that GDPR fines are here and they're here to stay. Now, here in the United States, under Ccpa, there are over 80 cases. That's a lot. The law only became effective January 1st last year and enforceable in July. So we have a lot of cases that still need to be reviewed to determine what's going to happen. You might have seen Zoom. We are on Zoom now, but there was a big FTC settlement back in October. Sometimes the FTC settlements are not always financial driven. There's a lot of, you must create a privacy and security program with very specific tactics underneath. And then often they have to be audited and reviewed every 2 years for up to 20 years. So not to mention all the negative press that comes with them. Some of you here might be in the children's space. You might be having sites or ads targeted at children. So I threw some of those fines in here so you could get a sense that when it comes to children's data, regardless of the law or jurisdiction, do not play around. Almost every jurisdiction and law takes children's data very seriously. And the TikTok violation here was for children's data. And then oftentimes, kind of the other marketing laws, and there's so many fines, it's hard to list them all. But we have COPPA here. You can have civil penalties up to $42,000 per violation. TCPA, with the increase of text marketing, you really want to be paying attention to the text campaigns that you have, as well as auto calls. And then can spam. I don't know about you, I get lots of emails that I did not ask for. And if those parties are found or you are blasting inappropriately, those fines can be very costly. Some of the other reasons that we want to be paying attention is because of our customers. Remember, one of the first pieces that we talked about. So 79% of adults in the United States said that they were at least somewhat concerned about how companies were using the data collected about them. 10% of consumer respondents said that they trust consumer packaged goods or media and entertainment companies. 52% said that they've decided not to use a product or service because they were worried about how much personal information would be collected about them. Now, the flip side to that statistic are the other 48% that gave the information. We don't know how accurate that information was. They might have just provided it to be able to get through and get whatever it is that they were looking for. But you could potentially have a data quality issue in addition to a data privacy issue if the individuals don't feel comfortable. And 87% said they would not do business with the company if they had concerns about its security practices. And 71% would say, I'm just not going to do business with them if they gave away sensitive information without their permission. Further, it can be costly. An average data breach can cost almost $4 million. And more than 2/3 of small businesses will suffer a data breach. And of those, almost 2/3 of them will go out of business within 6 months. Preparation is key when it comes to managing data security. And sometimes I know we have security frameworks and then we have privacy frameworks. And the privacy frameworks say that we should have data minimization. And we also have to use data with a legitimate purpose in the EU and other areas. So how do you balance the security frameworks and the privacy frameworks? It is possible. The very first step to doing that is really understanding the data that you have, the purpose that you need it for. And from there, you're able to match up the framework with the privacy law and the overall company risk. So it is a bit of an exercise. And again, the starting point should be data. So here, 46% of consumers feel that they've lost control over their own data. Again, 2/3 of Americans would blame the company, not the hacker, for the loss of personal data. I talk to companies a lot, and they will say, well, my data's in the cloud, so I'm fine. The cloud provider has it all covered. But when there's a data breach, the company is not going to blame the cloud. They're going to blame you, the person that they gave the data to. And oftentimes, there's a variety of items that we can do to help minimize what could happen if a cloud provider was hacked. But it is on us to evaluate those cloud vendors and on us to make sure that we have the right settings in place. And 2/3 of Americans say that privacy is one of the biggest issues that faces our society. And that is evident. And I believe we're going to see more and more pressure and lobbying from corporations and individuals to manage privacy. So I'm just kind of curious. You do not have to tell me which one, but drop a message in the chat and maybe a thumbs up or just say a yes. If you agreed with one of these stats, were you one of the people in here that felt a little uncomfortable at how companies are managing data? Or you would blame the company? I'd be curious to know, what are your views? So a few folks agreeing that they are one of these people. I'm one of these people. I'll say that too. I think we all are in some degree. And so with that in mind, put yourself in the shoes of a customer and think about going through your day and what happens with the data. So imagine you're working in your company, but really put yourself in the shoes of your customer, because we're all customers. Now, kind of imagine that we can do most of these activities today. I realize we are in an interesting COVID era, but for the most part, we're still doing lots of tracking all over the place. And in some capacities, even more when it comes to health data. So imagine you've left your house, you have your phone, you stop at the drive-thru for your cup of coffee, Maybe you've been fortunate to be able to drop kids off at school, potentially gone to work. Maybe you've gone back home for work. You've ordered out maybe for lunch. Maybe you've done a yoga class, either virtually or in person. Maybe you've driven somewhere. We've probably all watched a lot more TV this last year. Maybe you've bought more Internet of Things and been talking to your Amazon Alexa. Think about all the places that you are tracked. And as marketers, they're looking for all that data so that they can target us with the perfect message so that we buy that product and service. If you're in the product and service business, you want to understand how are people using your data? What are people's habits? Now, this is obviously a B2C example, but the same would be true in a B2B context. All that tracking adds up to significant amounts of data. And a big part of the privacy laws are trying to explain and teach people how to be able to be informed. What kind of data do you have on me? And how can I control that data? What are my choices? And should you even track this in the first place, according to some privacy laws? And as a result, companies are in the data business. You might be selling widgets, you might be selling services, but you're actually in the data business. I've had companies tell me, oh no, I don't collect any data. I said, well, what about the contact us button? What about the analytics tracker to know who came to your website? What about the advertising pixel that you have on your website? Oh, right. I have that. Companies will say, oh, but I just have name and email. I don't have any personal data. And my answer is, great. You have a lot less that you have to manage. Other times it's, well, I only have data in a CRM. That CRM counts. So you have to think about and really understand the data, because the heart of a privacy program is the data. And so with that being said, what are kind of the common privacy mistakes that I see? Well, the first one, you don't know the data. And actually, at the moment, let's see if my super dandy poll is going to be available. Yes, actually, no, we're going to wait on that. I was so excited, but we're going to wait just a few minutes. So the very first mistake is that people don't know the data. They think they know it. They kind of have an idea. They're not really sure. They did it a couple years ago for that GDPR thing that came along, but they don't actually know the data. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to companies and they don't know. It's a technology company and they actually don't have an idea of exactly the type of data and where it's stored or where it's backed up, or they have no idea what the marketing team is doing or the finance team, HR, customer support. It's decentralized and everyone's bought their own tools. The next big mistake I often see is that the privacy steps taken to date are incomplete or they're inaccurate. Maybe you've done the data inventory, but you haven't created an individual rights process. Or maybe you've done the data inventory, but haven't matched it with the marketing program. Maybe you've reviewed the marketing program, but haven't updated the privacy notice. Maybe you updated the privacy notice based on what you think, but haven't actually done the documentation for data inventory. Maybe you've done all of this, but you haven't updated it in quite a while. And businesses change. And it's important to continue to understand what data is going through your organization. Remember that day in the life of a customer and where is the data trail? Another really common one is just a complete misinterpretation or misapplication of the requirements. So here, I often get the question, I even kind of commented at the beginning, that many people think the California law is only about the sale of data. And that's a misnomer. It's a big part of the law, but not only part of it. The other is what is considered a sale of data. And what's going to be important to understand is in the CCPA 2.0, the one that was passed, it's called the Consumer Privacy Rights Act in California, CPRA, that was passed in November of 2020. That particular law breaks out selling and sharing and cross-device. We're going to need to be able to get that granular, and that is the future. So understanding what that means is really important. What about consent? If you're going to be using the basis of consent for GDPR purposes, what does consent need to look like? Some people think it's just a checkbox. Well, what type of checkbox? Can you always use that checkbox? Does anything else need to be included? What type of language needs to be there? Where does it go? When do I need the privacy notice? There's a long list of requirements for these laws, And it's important to always stay fresh on them or bring someone in who is able to help guide you. And then we talked about this earlier, but not having a clear and dedicated privacy owner is another common mistake. So oftentimes people say, well, that's legal's problem, or that's the privacy person's problem, or that's marketing. But actually, it's everybody's. Everyone in the company has a stake in the privacy program. And what often happens, and kind of why I was curious for where it was, is because everyone needs to understand who else is responsible. But you have to have at least one person to kind of corral all the cats and understand what the requirements are and have a solid plan, even if it's still a decentralized operation, which is fine. You just have to have at least someone who owns privacy, even on a part-time basis, but to have a single sponsor for privacy in the company. Now, my secret to managing all those mistakes is shh, don't tell. It's okay. We can tell the world. It's really that privacy compliance and building trust does not have to be hard, and it can help your business. And so I'm excited to share some of these ideas. In fact, I just talked about with one client this morning, and we were very excited about where this is going to go. So where do you need to start? Hopefully, when you leave this, it's going to be around knowing your data. And one of the resources I have is kind of a quick one sheet to help you think about where your data is. The questions you want to always be asking when you're starting a new product, project, service, marketing campaign, server, IT, vendor, anywhere personal data is going are these questions. What data do you have? How do you use it? Where is it stored? And who do you share it with? When you begin to understand those basic questions, the privacy requirements build on top of those. But these are the foundations that we really have to do. So you have to think about what types of data is included and where is it? One person once told me, well, I only have data offline, so that doesn't count because they thought that these laws are only about online data. All the offline data counts too. Other people think that the online data from all the pixels and tracking, and sometimes those pixels are used for security purposes, for fraudulent purposes. That all counts as data. Now, why you're using it and can you use it and your purpose for using it and how long you keep it all might change if it's a security purpose versus a marketing purpose versus fulfilling your customer's order. But it's important to be able to know where all your data is because then you can begin to write your privacy notice, protect the data, prevent fraud, manage your retention plan, and your compliance efforts. So it starts with data mapping. And now I'm going to start with my next poll, which is around data mapping. So has your company done a data inventory to ensure compliance with Gdpr, Ccpa, and other privacy laws? So have you done a data inventory once, but you haven't touched it in a while? You haven't done any type of data inventory. You have done it and it's updated annually. You have absolutely no idea. And you would like to get started, but you're not really sure how or where to start. And there's no wrong answers. I've worked with companies at all different stages here, and everyone's on their own journey for a variety of valid reasons. All right, I'm going to give it a few more moments and see if a few more folks might decide to join us. And having a chance to look at the chat, I do want to call out that I completely agree that ultimately the data controllers are responsible. They absolutely are. And if you're a service provider, you're also responsible. And if you think about it, you've been hired as a service provider to provide a service for customers. And if you can't fulfill the privacy obligation, why as a customer would I hire you again? Or why would I refer you? Okay, so I will end the polling and we can all see. So just under half of you have done a data inventory and you've updated it annually. A few folks are not sure. Some folks have not done anything and some have done it once and you haven't touched it since. So a really important part is that you do want to, oh, you know what? I didn't share the results so you can actually see those. Well, hopefully now you can see them. Thank you, Zoom polling. Okay. So a big part of what you want to be able to do is do and perform that data mapping. For some companies, an Excel sheet is fine. For some companies, data software is necessary or really great foundational step and makes things easier to help so that you have a strong foundation and any new future laws will be really easy for you to update. For others, you need that software, plus you might need a kind of AI engine to help find some of the data on an automated basis. There's generally not a lot of tools that will do it all perfectly in an automated fashion. There's still a human element to go through because you have to ensure what kind of data you have and what is the right legal basis for it under GDPR. Or, for example, under California, does it qualify as the sale of personal information? So you want to be thinking about all the different elements that could happen in data mapping. So we want to know where all the data is. And then someone familiar with privacy laws needs to come through and be that subject matter expert to question, do we need that data? Is this the right data? What kind of contract do we have in place with that vendor? What security measures do we need? How long should we keep it for? And again, what is the right purpose? And can we be using it? And should we be using it? And if we are, and it meets all those requirements, wonderful. Do we need to disclose that in our privacy notice? So there's multiple people, kind of going back to, you need the single privacy owner, but every part of the business needs to participate in this exercise. I wanted to call out very specifically the sale of personal information under California. You all can read the very long, boring definition, but the idea is that it's unique. It's not just the common sale of data for $1. And places where I find that data can be sold that's kind of considered, oh no, I don't sell any data. Advertising and analytics pixels, often considered sold, and many of them have very specific requirements and even hard coding that has to happen. Sponsored events. Do you have an event and you share the list? Do you do any type of joint promotion? Do you share data with third parties? And if you do share the data with a third party, they need to be classified as a service provider. If they're not classified as a service provider, then you could have been deemed selling the data. So understanding that flow of data and making sure that you know who it is and that they're a service provider and you have the right contract in place to say that is what will help you here with the sale of data. And the exercise here will also have to kind of have an update, as I mentioned, for the future California law to help us on the sharing of data. So as you go through 2021 and you embark on new data activities, be mindful of, are we selling this data? Are we sharing this data? Because coming soon, you're going to have to understand the difference between those. Some other parts that you want to be thinking about are the security measures. Training. It's so critical to mention training. So today is National Privacy Day. A lot of companies around the world are hosting training and communication. It's a great time to review technical and organizational measures. I mentioned if you have cloud providers, that's wonderful that you have a cloud provider. At the same time, there's activities you can do to prevent bad actors from having access to it. Making sure only people in the organization who do need access do. Is your laptop encrypted? Is your data encrypted? How does data flow back and forth? There's a myriad of technical and organizational measures that you want to have in place. You also want to review cybersecurity insurance. Not all insurance is considered the same. It's really important to understand what policy you have and read the fine print. Managing for an incident response is also really helpful, and you want to make sure that you have a plan in place and you've practiced that plan. Nothing like having a plan on a file on a hard drive. Then you have ransomware. You actually can't get to your drive. You have no idea what the plan is, or you didn't have a plan in the first place. And it's happening. Phishing campaigns are off the charts. Last year, when COVID started, Google had reported they were 350% higher, and they're going to continue on that trajectory. So it's really, really important that everyone has training. The employees are the biggest strength and weakness to an organization. What happens if we don't do these things? Well, there's an individual private right of action under Ccpa. Many of the 80 cases that I mentioned under Ccpa are part of this. There are 50 data breach laws plus Puerto Rico and Guam, as well as global privacy laws. Imagine you're a global company. That's a lot of breach laws that you have to manage. And then, of course, loss of customer trust. Now, for our friends here who also have to deal with GDPR and the global transfer of data, you might have heard that Privacy Shield that more than 5,000 companies used starting in July became null and void. So what do companies do? As well as if you have information in the UK with Brexit, what do you do? Well, the case is called the Schrems 2 case. There's a lot of information. I did a whole different webinar on it, but the kind of high level view is basically Privacy Shield's invalid. You have to find a different way to be able to move your data. You have to review all your cloud vendors and make sure that they're addressing this too. Companies are kind of contracting their way through it, making data that needs to stay in the EU. So many cloud providers are now offering the ability to have the data stay in a certain jurisdiction. The big issue at hand is if you have any type of data that the US government could ever tap into, you're at a higher risk, and there's some extra protocols that you probably need to take. I've even seen contracts kind of say and spell out, we don't have that type of data, and here are the security measures we have in place. And so they have to update all of their contracts to be able to address that situation. As of now, with Brexit, it is supposed to be able to still flow freely, but it is not finalized yet. We're still waiting to see what will happen with that. But as of now, even as of fresh this morning, we're still kind of in limbo. So it's a little bit of a wait and see. Hopefully, all fingers crossed that it will move freely. There's certainly a lot of companies in the UK who need that as well. Shifting gears a little bit to this idea of kind of marketing responsibly. We all want new customers. We want to share our message. How can we do that responsibly where we comply with privacy laws and actually earn the customer's trust? Well, we do that in a variety of ways. How we communicate to them, the words we use, the language we use is going to be a key part. Not buying lists is going to be another one. Who are the people that we're trying to target? So there's a long list of challenges when it comes to buying lists. That's a whole nother field day, but kind of be thinking about where are you getting the data from to be able to market to people, and put yourself in the consumer's spot or the customer spot first. We need to be thinking about opt-in versus opt-out, but literally look at the copy that you're using and what type of messaging are you using and what are you trying to sell. So we're going to get into that here in just a few minutes. First, let's talk a little bit about cookie banners. I'm always kind of asked about cookie banners. So this is like the most text I have, I think, on a slide. But the idea is in the EU, cookie banners are opt-in. The cookie fires after I hit accept. I should not block the site. So for anyone in user experience or who likes customer experience, make sure that you're looking at mobile and the website and the cookie experience. I can't tell you how many times I've personally seen my whole experience shot by a cookie banner. And in the United States, a cookie banner is not necessarily required under a law. It's a nice to have. It's a best practice. There's a variety of different ways to kind of make it a positive experience. But do keep in mind that under CCPA, cookies can be considered a sale of data. And you need to make sure that you're meeting what we talked about before with the sale of data requirements. And you do want to have a separate cookie notice. I highly recommend a cookie tool to be able to manage you from the EU to the US. Opt-in. If you're thinking about email marketing, making sure you do not have pre-ticked boxes. You're specific. It's not a condition of service. It's easy to withdraw. You have a link to the privacy notice. Depending on who you are sending and what email service provider you have will determine your GDPR settings. I just threw an example here of a company called ConvertKit. MailChimp is different. Salesforce, Pardot, HubSpot, they all have a different approach to how they manage GDPR. And it is up to you, the company, to be able to make sure that you're managing that appropriately. Now, I'm sure all of us here have received inundations of marketing from our retailers and every company out on the planet trying to reach us. We're not at conferences anymore. They have to find another way. Think about a preference center. So here we have Xfinity and Bed Bath & Beyond as just examples where I get to decide as the customer how I want to hear from the company. Instead of just one time unsubscribe, I never want to hear from you again, this is actually a way to keep subscribers. Let me decide how to have my messaging, how to have my communication. And that way, you're still communicating with me, but on my terms. And the conversation I had this morning with a company is they're looking to implement a preference center. And we talked about, well, how can I get someone to even opt in to sign up for my emails? And we talked about how we can use privacy and the concerns that they have as a feature. So do you have a privacy page on your website talking about all the privacy features? Maybe you are SOC compliant, ISO. Maybe you just care about privacy. Maybe you've gone through GDPR and Ccpa exercises. Shout that from the rooftops. Your competitors are doing it. You need to consider that too. Have a privacy portal where people can make their choices and learn about your information. You can put a data protection addendum out there, a service provider, the privacy link. Think about the objections of why someone might not provide data to you. What are they concerned about? And use language to alleviate their objections and encourage them to come in. That's where you're starting to build the trust. If you're asking for data, explain the benefits. Why do I need to know how many people are in your family? Why do I need to know what your health situation is or how much you make? Alleviate why I don't want to give you that data. I will be more apt to do so. And then if I want to manage how often I'm hearing from you, let me do it on my terms. So when you build trust through privacy notices, the way we do this is very similar to what I've just described. The privacy notice is a vehicle for you to be able to communicate what you're doing with data to your customer. It's transparency. It's now required from a variety of privacy laws, but it is literally a tool. It's a mechanism that should align with your business practices and be the way that you build trust with your customers. We've all seen, I've written the long, typical privacy notice. You're going to start seeing privacy pages with summaries and hyperlinks. Imagine big visual opportunities. Microsoft does a really nice job with being able to have a nice visual experience. You can click on how you're using my data in a kind of a big box. I can control what I'm doing. That's going to help summarize what I, the customer, care about most. You've been transparent, you've met the legal requirements, and you've built a strong relationship that will last quite a while. So technology is transforming our world, and we need to find the balance of privacy and security. There's an intersection here of how much data we have, how much data we collect, why we need it, and what our customers expect of us. The idea of being perfectly compliant is very challenging. You will meet the most conservative privacy professionals, and they will tell you, you can't be perfectly compliant. Businesses are changing, and we do have to find the appropriate balance between privacy and security. They have to be at a seat at the table. Just like we're considering marketing, finance, legal, HR, IT, finance, the privacy and security piece needs to be a part. So the next time a new marketing initiative is going to launch, or a new product or a new feature is going to be created, that is our time to say, well, hold on. Is there a privacy law I have to think about? What does my privacy notice say I'm going to do? Did I say that I was going to use data that way? If I didn't, it doesn't mean you can't. It means you have to review what it says and determine the right course forward. Maybe it means that you have to do something a little bit different, but I assure you, figuring that out at the beginning is going to be much, much better than at the end and at the expense of a security or a data breach. So with that being said, I think I had one more fun polling question I could have asked this one before, but I'd love to know on privacy messaging. So I kind of have a thing for preference centers. So I'm curious, does anyone here have a preference center? Or you're in the midst of implementing one? Or you're not? I guess I didn't ask, not sure. Okay, I'm going to end polling here and share my results. So I see that we're kind of split. Looks like a lot of people don't have a preference center. A few do, and some are in the midst of it. I think what you're going to find is that you're going to see more and more preference centers. This is an opportunity for a competitive edge. Your competition is going to start doing this, and why not it be you? So something to consider for your 2021 action plan. Some of the highlights: maintain the privacy notice, honor individual rights, manage that marketing messaging. Can you send that email? What should it say? And how to secure data. I'm going to pause for just a moment because I have here no preference center, but if someone wants to delete all data, but it can be requested. Very well. Thank you for sharing that. The other thing that actually raises a really interesting point, what I am seeing is in terms of honoring individual rights, there are a lot of companies moving to making this self-serve. Now, to do this, this really requires a fair amount of technology and making sure that all the systems align and having a nice streamlined approach of where all the data is, or having lots of connectors to find it all. But you do see a fair number of places where you can use technology to be able to not only manage the workflow of the request, but actually a bit of a self-serve to do so. That will also continue to be the future. We're a bit in the infant stage, or I guess kind of the toddler stage. GDPR, I used to call, was like the infant stage for privacy. And now we're sort of in the toddler. We've been here a couple years now of these types of laws and where we're going. And the future laws that are being considered in the United States are at the same of Ccpa or moving towards GDPR. So Ccpa is still the floor. And if you kind of think about it in other contexts, California often does set the bar. Think about our furniture. They had requirements for certain toxic chemicals to not be a part of it. You didn't have furniture makers saying, well, I'm going to build the furniture for everybody else. You can have all the toxic chemicals, but Californians, you're good. You get the special kind, right? No one can do that in their supply chain. You're going to start seeing the same thing here. And I do see it now with companies where they're looking at privacy, even if it's a single law, to apply it across the board to all their customers. And technology will continue to help us do that. And you have to understand your data to be able to do that. So what I don't have here, because it was like the underpinning of this entire conversation, is understanding your data. And I see a comment here about employees, job applicants, and web visitors, non-customers. So a little bit about that. Depending on the law, determines if employees are in scope and the severity of, or I guess the not so much severity, but how deep they are. So for GDPR, employees are completely in scope. Job applicants, completely in scope. Everything all applies to them. Under California, employees got delayed under the new law passed in November for 2 years for part of it. Today, you need to provide applicants. Actually, job applicants are like customers, but for employees, they need a privacy notice. Here's what you do with my data. If you sell employee data, their rights apply. And if their data is breached, their individual rights regarding a data breach applies. But today, right now, individual rights like the access and deletion under California is delayed. Some companies have chosen to continue to offer that to employees. Others have decided to wait. So I hope that answers your question. If not, please let me know. Oh, good. I'm so glad to hear that. Okay, so with all that being said, you kind of have a couple options. Do it yourself, which is great. Hope there's a number of people here who have privacy teams, so that is wonderful and fabulous. For others, you need to kind of hire professionals, and that's a little bit about where Red Clover comes in. So there's a do it with me approach and a do it for me approach. Now, I did promise all of you a worksheet for this that takes a lot of what we talked about in this session. So I will send that out after our discussion here. So in the recording, do make sure that you look at that particular worksheet because it'll kind of get you started on thinking about what you need for your 2021 plan and help determine, are you good where you are, or maybe you need to hire someone? And there's a variety of different approaches. There's kind of your traditional do it for me consulting service, and at the same time, a bit of a hybrid approach, like a do it with me kind, where we'll come in and help for part of what you need, but it's a dual team effort. The types of things that we help with: data inventories, marketing strategy, and marketing messaging. I had so much fun this morning doing marketing strategy and marketing messaging because it was all about privacy and trust and bridging everything together. Training, workshops, privacy notices, planning that process, and playbook, if you will, for individual rights so that when Jodi submits it, you have an idea of what to do with it. And of course, understanding vendor assessments and building a core program. We really look at it from your business because every business is different. This is one company's business, but we start with understanding where you are in the process. And I'm going to pause for a moment because I have a great question. How are clients dealing with compliance with the right to be forgotten GDPR backup data? So that's a great question. Also, I had a very busy day. I had a lot of conversations today because just earlier we talked about that in this particular situation, in theory, you're supposed to have all the data backed up. So depending on where it is, you might be able to flip a switch. You also need to kind of go with the backup data. So the technical answer is you're supposed to find the backups. At the same time, you have to not have one individual infringe on the other individual or at the expense of the company. So all that to be said, that's kind of a challenging situation. And you have to really look at it on a case-by-case basis to figure out what is the appropriate answer for where your data is and how it's backed up. And can you kind of take out that one little piece? At the same time, it's important to understand how are your backups maintained. So sometimes backups are kept only for a period of time. Some companies, literally a day, 7 days, 30 days. If you have backups for years, that would be a time to really look at the backup system that you have and kind of the retention of those and say, I don't need all of those backups. And that would be one way to help minimize because you kind of have a regular cycle. So what would have been there would have then been deleted after a certain period of time that would have been considered reasonable. So I hope that addresses that question. A little bit about how do we deal with consulting? A big part, again, I said that we approach it for your business. It's a completely customized approach for what each business needs. We're really all about building trust with customers and trying to lead with a privacy forward approach and help you gain a competitive edge because many companies are not here understanding what's required of the law and they're trying to do just the bare minimum. But you have an opportunity to really be a leader, a trusted voice in your space and be a competitive and gain that competitive edge and build really a long-term relationship with customers. So kind of a fun tidbit too. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you might know that I have a podcast. In fact, a really fascinating podcast dropped today about the cookieless world, perfect timing with Apple's release. So I highly encourage you to go and check it out. You can visit redcloveradvisors.com/podcasts. So we launched our podcast this fall. Some people get COVID puppies. We launched a podcast. So like any good marriage, we debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about data privacy and security. And I invite you to listen. Like I said, there was a great podcast that dropped today about cookieless, being in the cookieless world from a marketing perspective and what you need to think about. And so much of it ties to what we talked about here with the need to really harness your marketing messaging because we're going to be having a massive shift to first-party marketing. So how to get started, you can schedule your free privacy risk assessment here. This is a hyperlink. I can also include the Calendly link in the summary material. And I thank you so much for your time. We do have some moments left. If anyone has any additional questions, I would be delighted to help answer them. So I'm going to open it up, and if I can figure it out, you can even, actually, you should just be able to unmute yourself if you'd like to participate. So any questions that I can answer? Well, I think, here we go. What conflicts, but just here, no question, but just here to stress partnerships with legal records retention and CIS. Yes, thank you so much for really mentioning that. And I love that you did because data retention, it's interesting. If you have a retention policy, you have to follow it. Otherwise, you've actually gone against your own policy. And the Federal Trade Commission doesn't like you when you do that in a privacy notice. They come after companies when that happens. So here, we really want to make sure that we're managing our own data retention policy. And all the laws, a theme in them is to have data minimization. You do not need to keep every point of data forever. You need to keep the data that you need for a business purpose, and that needs to match up with the record retention and with legal and whomever is in your information technology part of the organization, whether you're a startup and it's one person or it's 10 people or hundreds of people, whomever it is, making sure that it is aligned. It is not one person's job or one group's job for sure. And there was another one. What conflicts dilute the priority of organizations to comply with data privacy in practice? I think the idea that sales and the cost to comply, people kind of still look at it as a cost, as opposed to realizing that, well, there are costs to do business. We have costs for taxes, we have costs for accountants, we have costs for buildings, and we have costs for insurance. But at the same time, the flip way to look at this is to realize that privacy is going to be a driver. If we go back to the percentages, you have 80% of people who don't want to do business with a company they can't trust, and a myriad of other statistics that support that kind of concept and theories. So it's important to realize that you will lose sales, whether you're in B2C or B2B. And I have seen it, especially in the B2B market. And I have seen B2C brands be so particular about their brand that they won't hire a service provider. So the B2C brands I know are also taking it extremely seriously. So you're going to lose sales. You're going to lose a competitive edge if people only look at it from a cost point of view. And these laws are complicated. The best way is to just get started. And the best place to get started is to start with understanding your data and then begin to do some of the outward facing pieces, making sure you have a solid privacy notice, making sure your cookie banner is doing what it's supposed to in the right jurisdiction, because the jurisdictions are different. And if you have them flip-flop or not a good experience, that's a pretty easy fix to do with not a lot of money or even time invested. And then you can begin with marketing messaging of just even a standard page on your site that talks about privacy and why you care about it with just the links. That's a very common practice these days, especially in a technology field, but I'm seeing it more and more in other areas as well. So I hope that also addresses the question. And thank you. So with that, I am going to close it. I hope that everyone has a fabulous, happy Privacy Day and cookie eating day. So don't forget to go and eat your cookies. Thank you so very much.